Malcolm X once said, "People don't realize how a whole man's life can be changed by one book," and I completely agree. Books have always been a huge part of my life. In fact, ever since I learned how to read, I've never not been reading a book. Like many kids in my generation, I started off by obsessively reading series like Goosebumps and Animorphs. And by the time I was in the fifth grade, I had moved on to more challenging books like Moby Dick. When I got to middle school and high school, I really started being exposed to powerful books that I'll never forget. Books like Hatchet, The Giver, The Outsiders, Animal Farm in 1984. When I finished high school, I made it my mission to read all of the world's classical literature. So I started going to the library every single week and I read amazing books by authors like Steinbeck, Hemingway, and Dostoevsky. I fell in love with books like The Stranger, Catcher in the Rye, On the Road, and Fahrenheit 451. But it was when I went to community college that I started reading books that would change my life and shape my entire outlook on the world. This is when I started seeking out nonfiction books to better understand the world around me. And today I want to talk about 5 of those books that shaped who I am today. The first book that really blew my mind was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And the reason why I sought this book out is because when I was in middle school and high school, my teachers taught me that Malcolm X represented the bad side of the civil rights movement. They said he was the exact opposite of Martin Luther King and should be condemned because he believed in using violence to achieve his goals and he was practically a racist. Now, when I was a teenager, I got this idea that anything my parents or teachers or any authority figure told me was bad was actually probably good. If they told me not to read a book, it would make me want to read it. If they told me to be a good Christian, I wanted to be an atheist. If they told me capitalism was the best form of government, I wanted to be a socialist. And even though this started off as a typical teenage rebellion, this philosophy has actually worked pretty well throughout my life. I've usually found that if people in authority think something is bad, chances are it's actually good. So when my teachers told me Malcolm X was an evil, bad man, they just wanted to make me learn about him even more. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was around 19 or 20, and I had never experienced anything like it before. I had never encountered such an inspirational story and such a passionate individual. Malcolm X was born into a world of poverty and racism. He became a career criminal, spent 7 years in prison, then went on to become one of the best orators in American history and one of the most powerful fighters for black rights. I agreed with everything Malcolm X said about the ugliness and dangers of white supremacy. I had never heard someone speak so much truth and be willing to give their life for their beliefs. Malcolm X also wasn't afraid to admit when he was wrong. He wasn't afraid of change. For all of these reasons, Malcolm X is the first person I ever called my hero. And to this day, I try to carry the spirit of Malcolm X into the classroom when I teach. I came across the next 2 books that changed my life during my search for answers to the biggest questions anyone can possibly ask. Is there a God? Are heaven and hell real? Why do we exist? Where do we come from? Now, even though I grew up in the Methodist Church, I never actually believed in God. It just never seemed real to me. When I read the Bible during my confirmation, it always seemed like stories, not reality. So once again, I decided to seek out the books that Christians told me were evil and bad, because I figured if they didn't want me to read them, they must contain some truth. When I was a teenager, I remember going to the beach and seeing a big protest where Christians were holding up signs that said things like, "Darwin is in hell," and "Evolution is Satan's lie." So naturally, what did I do? I ran to the library and I checked out Darwin's famous book on the origin of species. And by the time I got to the last page, I was 100% convinced that God is not real, he did not create human beings, and we evolved from other life forms on Earth. By the time I finished the book, I was a proud atheist who believed in Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Today, my Darwinism and atheism is what I'm most proud of about my intellectual journey, because no one told me to be an atheist. Not my parents, not my preachers, not my teachers. Atheism is something that I came to on my own, through my own research and my own critical thinking. That's why my atheism is absolutely precious to me. Now, at that same Christian protest where they said that Darwin was in league with the devil and burning in hell, I remember they held up another sign that said, "The Big Bang is a lie." So what did I do? I went and read everything I could about the universe, and that led me to a book called Cosmos by Carl Sagan. When I started reading Cosmos, I immediately fell in love. To me, the way that Carl Sagan described the universe was more beautiful and powerful than anything I had ever heard in church or read in the Bible. I'm not a spiritual person at all, but the closest I've ever come to a spiritual experience is learning about the universe and thinking about how the elements that make up my body were created in the burning hearts of exploding stars. After I read Cosmos, I went on to read every single book that Carl Sagan ever wrote. He's another one of my heroes for his passion for scientific education and his ability to take complex ideas and easily explain them to anyone. After reading Darwin and Sagan, I was convinced that the Bible does not contain the truth about our existence in this universe. I felt like all those years in church I had been lied to by people who believe in fantasies and delusions. I was honestly bitter and angry at Christianity, and I had an extremely negative view of all religions. And I would probably still have those beliefs if it weren't for one of my college professors giving me a book to read. After I gave a presentation on atheism in one of my classes, my professor recommended that I read The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. She said that it might help me understand the origin and meaning of religion, and it did that and more. After reading this book, I no longer hated religion or saw it as simply lies and illusions. I now saw all of the world's religions as part of one big human story. I found a way to appreciate religious stories, not as real historical events, but as symbols and allegories of the struggles we all face in our lives. From Joseph Campbell, I learned that religion can be empowering and enlightening when you don't take it literally, but allegorically. Thanks to Campbell, I gained a new appreciation of religion that led me to study as many of the world's religions as I possibly could. Thanks to him, I went on to read the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, and many other holy books. Today, I love teaching my students about the world's religions because I believe that they all contain elements of truth and beauty. Now, growing up in America, there are certain names that I was taught to fear and hate, names like Malcolm X and Charles Darwin, but I was taught that the most evil of them all was Karl Marx. So you know what I had to do, right? When I got to college, I ran to the library and I checked out a book on communism called Marx, A Short Introduction by Peter Singer. Just as I was an atheist by the time I finished reading Darwin, I was a communist by the time I finished reading Marx. I had never agreed with anything more than I agreed with Marx. I agreed with every single word he said. From the time I was a teenager, I thought that capitalism was wrong and evil, but now I had a solution to that evil. The solution is a fight for a communist society where the workers control the means of production and make sure that the working class has access to all of the basic necessities they need to survive. Just like my atheism, my communism is absolutely precious to me because no one told me to be a communist. I arrived at this conclusion due to my own thinking and my own intellectual journey. It's mine and no one can take it away from me. So these are the 5 books that changed my life. Thanks to Malcolm X, I will never stop fighting racism and white supremacy. Thanks to Charles Darwin and Carl Sagan, I'm an atheist who sees beauty in nature and the universe. Thanks to Joseph Campbell, I can also see the beauty in religion when we analyze it allegorically. And thanks to Karl Marx, I'm a communist who wants to see a world where housing, food, clothing, education, and healthcare aren't luxuries you have to pay for, but human rights available to all. So remember what Malcolm said. One book can change your life. So let's get reading.